Welcome to Code Cuts. This is the first in a series of video tutorials that I'm going to be producing for the Android development platform. There are some really lacking resources. It's very difficult to get started doing some things, so I figured I would sort of hopefully help prevent people from making the same irritating mistakes that I did when I was first learning. So this first video is going to start out pretty slow. I'm just going to explain the Android environment. If you have experience already, feel free to skip this one. My tentative sort of syllabus is thusly. I will first be producing this one, and then after that I'll create another video discussing some of the resources for Android and how to use them, because that requires a video all on its own. And then after that I'll be going over how to actually create a live wallpaper from start to finish. And this will not just be a casual live wallpaper, we will make a complete framework. And so that'll be really cool. Now let's get started. In this first video I will be covering a few things about Eclipse specifically. I'll assume that you've already installed everything because the installation for getting Eclipse set up is pretty well documented. In this tutorial, I'll be going over resource files and DPI magic keywords specifically, and the general folder structure behind a project. We'll go over the manifest file briefly, the source folder, namespaces, how to create a layout, and some cool key commands that you can use in Eclipse. So to start, let's look at resource files. If you create a new project, which I've done, mine is called Code Cuts 1, very original, I go into the res folder. This is a magic place. Here you have, first of all, the default, it gives you 4 drawable folders, or what I call DPI folders. Each one of these is where you can put resources like an image or something for your project. The thing is that each folder has a letter or two in front of the DPI part of it. So you see drawable-h DPI, drawable-l DPI, m DPI, and xh DPI. These are for different screen resolutions, basically. So if you have a really crappy Google G1 phone, you'd probably want to first develop with the LDPI. And these are really just so that the phone knows which folder to grab resources from, so it's fast and snappy and all that good stuff. Now, I think the ideal design pattern sort of is to basically just port your graphics to these different folders and have them scaled differently or whatever you're going to do. So it gives you a lot of control over the resources per phone resolution. One of my favorite folders is if you right click and you create a brand new folder, there's a special keyword you can use. If you call it drawable-no DPI, all of a sudden you've got a folder that works for all resolutions. So since I'm kind of lazy, I like to just put really high resolution stuff in the no DPI and let the phone sort it out. Not the best practice, but it's something you can do. It's pretty great too if you're lazy like me. In addition, you've got your layout folder, which stores the XML file for layouts. And then you've got your values folder, and this stores XML for settings and strings and localization and stuff like that. And that's pretty much all there is to the resource folder specifically. Now let's talk about some of the other folders. So a new project is comprised of a source file and some other stuff, an assets folder, which you can use to store raw asset data in. So that's not what you'd use for like an image. That might be where you would store some default settings or resources or something, more like binary type files. You've got the bin folder and resource folder, which we just went over, and then a few basic, very consistent other files like the manifest file, which we'll go over next. So now that we've gone over the resource folder, let's look at what a manifest file is. Now there's 2 different ways to view this. You can view it with the Visual Designer, which I pretty much never do because I'm hardcore that way, but it's pretty useful. Or you can view the raw XML. Now this is where you specify a lot of information. Inside the manifest file, first of all, you've got the properties for your app. You've got any special permissions that it requires, which is important. Like if you want to do anything that requires accessing the internet or downloading a file, for example, you would have to add a tag in here specifically requesting permission to download a file. And what that does is it's a way to help define what your program does from a high level so that it can be filtered in the marketplace and so that it can show the proper and gain the proper permissions necessary to run certain aspects of your program or app. So in addition to setting up settings like your app name, your namespace, and permissions, the manifest file introduces a concept called an activity. Now, an activity is a pretty easy to visualize idea. It's sort of like a paragraph in an essay. Each time you want to switch to another topic in your essay, you would create a new paragraph. Each time you want to do something that's fairly majorly different in your program, you'd create a new activity. Another way to think of it is like a web page. Each time you go to a different high-level section, you'd create another web page and then link to it. So that's what an activity is. It's really just a screen, but it doesn't have to be. We'll go over that later, though, at a far later date. So you can define as many activities as you want, and they all live in the manifest file, and that's very important to remember. And that's the general gist of what a manifest file is. It's really just a place for settings about your app. So now that we've gone over the manifest file, let's go into the resources directory, and you guys should follow along here. And then we'll go into layout and then main.xml. I'm going to show you what comprises an app on the Android platform. Apps, screens specifically, are XML files. So for this one, we can see we've got the default hello world, and then it's got the name of the project. Well, the activity, actually. The viewer modifier thing for creating a page can be a little bit intimidating at first. There's a lot of aspects to it. It's really kind of hard to see. It took me forever to find. I'm not even going to try to search for it. Tab host. That's it. This weird box thing. Turns out it's a tab. So there's a lot that goes into creating an actual interface, and there are some key things to be aware of when doing it. Again, I will touch on this far deeper in another tutorial, and I'll also show you where you can go for some really good resources on how to do this yourself and how to look up stuff. Because there is actually some really well documented advice on the official developer portal for Android. But for all intents and purposes, I'm just going to create a few buttons, checkbox, and a progress bar, I think. And you can see I can just drag these things on as much as I want, and I'm creating an app. Not really sure what it does, but it's an app. So now that I've created the interface, there's an alternative side to the XML layout files. If you look down at the bottom of Eclipse, you can see main.xml. Now, this is where you can see the actual XML. It's a lot like a website, really. The XML file is what creates the layout, and eventually it'll get interpreted by the Android engine, and it'll be converted into actual objects, and the layout will be created, and that's how you get an app. But at its core, it's an XML file. So you can design it through XML, or you can design it through the interface, or you can do it through both. I did not mean to press that. So that's really all there is to the layout of an app. Next, now that we've created this anyway, let's go look at the code. So the very first folder is always the SRC folder. And inside the SRC folder is a namespace folder, and inside that namespace folder is your Java file. I'm sure you know by now that Eclipse is, well, the default language anyway is Java for Android apps. So this is what the start of a basic activity looks like. and this is automatically generated code. We won't really go over it for now. One thing I want to touch on though is something called namespaces. So you can see that this is called code.codecuts1.app. Okay, so if I right click the source folder and I go new package and I call it Sabre, give it the name Sabre and click finish, you can see it creates this empty sort of folder. So how this works is your namespace is comprised of the folder structure. So if my folder is called Sabre and then I go into that folder called Sabre and I create a new class, we'll call it light, finish, all of a sudden you can see I've got a package called Sabre with a class called light. So what does this mean? Well, it's important to realize this because this is how you can create subclasses, well, namespace really. You can create different namespaces for your software. So in one of my live wallpapers, for example, I created a package that contained all of the web stuff that I was going to do. I was like downloading images and stuff like that. So I contained it all in its own package. And that's how you can use namespaces. So if we jump back over to our automatically generated code. So now let's actually instantiate a new version of our class that we've just created. So we'll go sabre.light L equals new light. Which brings me into two more things. Special key commands. There are two amazing key commands in Eclipse. My favorite one is Control-Shift-O. If you press that, it'll try to resolve any missing packages in your program. So I just press Control-Shift-O, as in Oscar, and you can see it automatically imported sabre.light. That's pretty cool. The other key command is Control-Space, which is autocomplete, just like in Visual Studio or anything like that. And that's it for the introductory video. Thanks for watching. I have an organic syllabus, which is the spreadsheet that I showed you earlier, but I probably will be changing it. And I'll include that in the description of this YouTube video. So stay tuned for more. I've got plans to make a lot more videos. And like I said, this is a really basic introduction. We'll be ramping up really quickly in the next couple episodes. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and have a great day.